Hey, I'm Kate. It was just another regular morning as I walked into work, getting on with my tasks quietly and without complaint, just like I always did. But then, in front of everyone, my sister, of all people, spilled a hot cup of coffee right in my lap during a company lunch. The room burst into laughter. No one spoke up. Not a single person tried to stop it. Just when I thought I had finally been erased, completely ignored, my husband walked in. And not just any husband. He's a billionaire. In a matter of moments, he had fired everyone in the room. But that wasn't even the worst part. The real betrayal? That began long before the coffee. What if your own family spent years making you feel invisible, erasing you bit by bit? Would you even notice? Let me tell you the full story. I stood in the lobby of Lumen Analytics, my hands full. One holding a tray with 3 coffees, the other trying to balance a greasy brown paper bag with breakfast wraps. The doors behind me closed, cutting off the cold Seattle morning, but the chill still followed me in. A few people from marketing walked past, completely ignoring me. One intern, Nick, I think, barely looked up from his phone, just long enough to ask, "Hey, can you grab some extra creamers next time?" No thank you. No smile. Just expected. I kept walking because what else could I do? Should I tell him that I was the one who created the predictive sales model they were using this quarter? That I had an MBA from UCLA, not some barista training? That I wasn't the office coffee fetcher? Instead, I just offered a small smile and said, "Sure, no problem." By the time I made it to the second floor, the coffee's heat had soaked through the fabric of my blouse, and my arm was starting to throb. I paused for a moment to adjust the tray. Then my eyes fell on the large poster hanging above the staircase. There she was, Olivia, my sister. The visionary behind Lumen Analytics, the caption said. Her smile was so fake, that familiar tilt of her head, like she was pretending not to notice the camera. The same smile she used to convince our parents I was too sensitive when we were kids. The same one she flashed to the board members when she took credit for my work. I was already running late for the Monday meeting. When I finally walked into the boardroom, it was packed. Sleek, expensive chairs circled around the long glass table, the giant screen flashing with Olivia's presentation. I set the coffees on her seat, the breakfast bag right next to them. She didn't even glance up. No thank you. She just kept talking. If we want to hit Q3 growth, we need to think beyond projections. We need disruption. That was my cue. I had spent my weekend developing a model that could predict consumer purchasing behavior based on local weather patterns. It wasn't just good, it could revolutionize sales trends. I cleared my throat. Actually, Olivia cut me off, holding up her hand. "Let's save the math class for later. We're not running a school here." Laughter erupted. Easy, relaxed laughter from people who had never once bothered to ask me what I did all day. I sat down without saying another word. VP Thomas asked, "What's Kate's role again?" Olivia didn't skip a beat. "Oh, she's kind of floating around, support staff. She's helpful." Helpful? That word lodged itself in my throat, sharp and painful. I looked around the table, hoping someone, anyone, would acknowledge me. But they either avoided my gaze or stared right through me, as if I were just another piece of furniture. So I pulled out my notebook, the same one no one ever bothered to look at, and pretended to take notes, all while a part of me quietly fell apart inside. When the meeting ended, I gathered the empty cups and napkins without anyone asking me to. The room cleared out in a rush, everyone eager to dive back into their emails and work. I stayed behind for a moment, needing to catch my breath. That's when I felt it. Eyes on me. I turned to find Lucian Draper, the head of legal, standing just outside the door. He was older, silent, the kind of man who didn't say much but observed everything. His eyes met mine. For a split second, I thought he might speak, acknowledge what he'd seen. But he just nodded once, barely noticeable, and walked away. Silence is safe. Silence keeps jobs. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the elevator, and Mallory slid in beside me. She was young, sharp, and ambitious. An intern last year, now climbing the ladder fast. Not because she was better, but because she played the game better. She leaned in slightly. "Hey, I hope you don't mind, but Olivia asked me to present your deck next week. She said you'd be fine with it." "Fine with it?" I blinked at her. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice steady. "No problem," Mallory smiled. "Thanks. I mean, you laid all the groundwork. I'll just make it look better." We rode in silence the rest of the way. That night, I stayed late. No one else was around. The building was eerily quiet, the kind of silence only found in offices after hours. The soft hum of the ceiling lights, the distant tapping from an HVAC unit that hadn't been touched in years. I sat at my desk, eyes fixed on my name at the corner of my slide deck. For a moment, I wondered how long it would be before I, too, forgot I was the one who created it. They didn't need to fire me to erase me. They simply stopped seeing me altogether. The next morning, I came in earlier than usual, hoping that, if I got ahead of the noise, I might find some peace before the day's chaos tore it away. The office was dimly lit, eerily quiet, with the only sound being the hum of vending machines and the sharp click of heels from someone in marketing, arriving just after me. I walked to the lunchroom, craving water more than caffeine today. As I passed a group of interns huddled by the corner booth, I noticed they weren't laughing, but they were definitely trying to hold it in. The moment they saw me, they scattered. No greetings, no guilt. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and noticed one of their phones left face down on the table, but someone else beat me to it. "Hey," Joanna from accounting whispered, holding her phone screen low between us. "I'm not supposed to show you this, but you need to see it." The screen displayed an email thread, forwarded so many times it was hard to read, but what was clear was the image. Me cleaning the whiteboard in Conference B. The thread was so long it barely made sense anymore. But what stood out glaringly was the image of me wiping down the whiteboard in Conference B with the caption, "When nepotism comes with a mop." The subject line above it read, "Queen bee with no hive," followed by a reply, "At least she's good at cleaning up Olivia's messes." Joanna looked at me apologetically. I didn't laugh. She whispered something, but I just nodded and said nothing. I grabbed my water and left the room. At my desk again, I stared out the window. The clouds were thick, more so than usual for Seattle's spring. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just let the weight of it settle deep inside, invisible but present, like it always did. They didn't even bother hiding it anymore. I wasn't just overlooked. I was the punchline. The monthly recognition meeting came that afternoon. One of those empty celebrations designed to pretend we're valued employees. Bagels, balloons, a PowerPoint looping with smiling headshots, and vague bullet points like, "made an impact," or "elevated our culture." I wasn't expecting anything, but I definitely wasn't prepared for this. The slideshow clicked through names and smiles, until it landed on the Data Innovation Award. That one stung because it was mine. My model, the one I built, was highlighted for predicting market shifts based on user behavior trends. But under the recognition line, Mallory Penn. Not a mention of me. Not in the corner. Not even in the fine print. Olivia stood at the front, poised and perfect, the picture of leadership. "Our young talent is what drives us forward," she said, proudly gesturing toward Mallory. The applause was deafening, loud enough to drown out the buzzing in my ears. Lucian caught my eye from across the room. He didn't look away this time, but he didn't speak either. That evening, I left the meeting early and headed for the vending machine. I didn't need a snack. I just needed to get away. Think. Breathe. I fed the machine a crumpled dollar bill. It spat it back at me. I smoothed it out, tried again. Same result. On the third attempt, the machine swallowed the dollar, blinked twice, then froze. I stood there, motionless. It was petty, a minor inconvenience, but something about it shattered the composure I had been holding on to all day. My hand trembled, not from the machine, but from everything else. You don't break from the big hits, I whispered to myself. It's the small cuts, the subtle erasure of your name, over and over again. I went back to my desk just before sunset. The office had emptied. Olivia was gone. Mallory, too. As I sat under the dim lighting, I noticed a folder placed neatly on my chair. No note. I opened it, finding a printed version of my latest presentation, the one I'd worked on for the quarterly pivot. Every slide was there, every chart just as I'd designed it, except for one thing. Mallory's watermark in the bottom right corner of every page, and my name? Nowhere. I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I walked over to the printer tray, checked the timestamp, printed just 2 hours before the recognition meeting. I went back to my desk, sat down, and logged into my email. I opened a draft. Subject, documentation. I attached the scanned copy of the folder. The body was blank. I hit send to myself. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then shut the laptop. They thought I stayed silent because I didn't know how to fight. What they didn't know was that I was only getting started. The office was empty by the time I left. I walked slowly through the parking garage, letting the echo of my heels follow me, like a shadow that had learned to stay silent. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I needed the silence, not to think, but to let my thoughts unravel without judgment. The next day, an investor was visiting. One of those high-pressure showcases Olivia thrived in. The kind where we all pretended everything was aligned, efficient and inspired. The kind where she subtly reminded everyone that this company bore her name, even if it technically belonged to our parents. The investor was an older man, Bennett. Friendly, but clearly calculating. One of those people who reads between the lines more than listens to the words. He shook hands, asked too many questions, and smiled like he already knew who would get the next round of funding. Olivia greeted him at the front. Our mother right behind her, Keegan, the matriarch. She wore a tailored navy suit. Her hair pulled so tight it made her look perpetually in control. She greeted Bennett with polished confidence, guiding him down the hallway like she owned the building, which, in a way, she did. "This is Olivia," she said, gesturing proudly. "My daughter, the brains behind all of this." I stood about 3 feet away. She didn't even glance at me, didn't introduce me, didn't acknowledge I was there. Bennett turned to me, politely puzzled. "And you are?" I smiled just enough to be civil. "I'm the one who wipes down the whiteboard." He blinked, then let out a puzzled chuckle, like maybe it was a joke. It wasn't. Later that evening, Olivia insisted we all have dinner with the investor. She reserved a table at some fancy seafood restaurant downtown. White tablecloths, waiters calling you ma'am, without irony, the kind of place with a wine list longer than the menu itself. I didn't want to go, but not going would have looked petty, weak. So, I showed up, smiled through the introductions, and sat quietly while Olivia bragged about her debate trophies from high school and her early admission to Stanford, even though she'd transferred after just 2 semesters. She never mentioned that I had earned a full scholarship to UCLA, graduated early, or that I had presented at a national conference before I was 30. She talked about Olivia like she was the only daughter she ever had. I picked at my food, listening, watching Olivia laugh and dazzle. Somewhere between the lobster bisque and the seared halibut, the truth hit me. There comes a time when silence doesn't protect them anymore. It only exposes you. Later that week, Back at the office, I had to drop off a hard copy file in Olivia's office. It was late. Most of the staff had gone home, and I thought I'd just leave the file on her desk and slip away. Her door was slightly ajar. I walked in, and that's when I heard my mother's voice. "Listen," my mother said, her voice sharp and impatient. "You need to transition her out sooner, not later. People are starting to notice." Olivia exhaled, annoyed. "She's not going anywhere. That's the problem. She's too close. You know the drill. Keep her around, but far from the action. I've been doing that for months." Olivia snapped. "She's just quiet. She doesn't fight. She never has." I stood there frozen, as still as the air around me. Quiet, but not empty. Slowly, I set the file on a side table and stepped out of her office. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't feel angry. I felt awake. Back at my desk, I opened a new email. Subject: documentation, pseudo attachment. The audio recording from my phone, still running in my coat pocket, played through in my mind as I hit send. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment in a baggy sweatshirt, a cup of tea growing cold next to me. I pulled out an old shoebox filled with family photos. One of them was of me, age 10, holding a science fair ribbon, with Olivia in the background, arms crossed, not smiling. I used to believe I was invisible because I wasn't good enough. But now I knew. It wasn't because I lacked value. I was invisible because I refused to shrink myself to fit their idea of what enough should look like. That night, I created a new folder on my laptop. Contingency plan. If they were going to come for me, I wasn't going to just sit back. I'd been underestimated for too long, and if they thought I wouldn't fight back, they clearly weren't paying enough attention. The next morning, I paced around my apartment, letting the kettle boil over twice, forgetting where I put my keys. I wasn't panicking. I was preparing. There's a difference. By the time I stepped into the office, something in me had changed. I wasn't there to survive anymore. I was there to remember who I was before I allowed them to rewrite me. I dropped my bag at my desk and checked my voicemail. I hadn't cleared them in weeks. I couldn't stomach hearing another "just checking in" or "circling back." But today, I did. The second message caught my attention. A woman's voice came through, professional, yet warm. "Hi, Miss Lumen. This is Kayla from Eastbrook Data. We met briefly at the Boston Tech Summit in June. Our director of strategy is moving to Europe, and we'd love to talk to you about stepping into that role. We think your work with consumer behavioral modeling is exactly the direction we need. Give us a call if you're open to a conversation." The date on the message, 5 weeks ago. I sat completely still, listening to the beep at the end of the message. A director-level offer in Boston, real recognition. And I had ignored it. Or worse, turned it down. Because 6 weeks ago, Olivia had looked me in the eyes and said, "I can't save this company without you, T. I trust you more than anyone." I thought I was helping my sister rebuild something worth saving. But it turns out, I was only hammering nails into my own coffin. Later that afternoon, we had our quarterly strategy meeting. I thought I knew what was coming. The presentation was titled, "Predictive Models for Consumer Pulse." That was mine. My code, my project, my sweat. I watched as the screen lit up with my charts, my formulas, my structure, now repackaged under a shiny new title. Mallory walked to the front in a pressed blouse and patent leather heels, grinning like she'd spent the last 3 months just polishing the work I'd done in the dark. She began, "I'm proud to present a predictive framework we've been building to anticipate regional consumer behavior." Mallory didn't even know the difference between logistic and linear regression until I explained it to her last month. And there it was. Olivia standing in the back, nodding like a proud mother at her child's recital. She didn't speak until the end. Then she clapped twice and said, exactly what I envisioned when I hired fresh minds to shake things up. Fresh minds. I sat still, every part of me screaming, but my face remained composed. When the meeting finally wrapped up, I opened my inbox. As expected, an automated email popped up. Subject: Thank you, Kate. Great note-taking today. Your support makes everything smoother. I slowly walked back to my desk, closed my laptop, and then opened the draft folder on my desktop. Inside, I found the original version of the presentation, my name on every page, my notes in the margins, time-stamped edits saved on a cloud account that only I controlled. There was no room for excuses. No, maybe you misunderstood. I highlighted the entire folder, dragged it into the contingency plan directory, then backed it up in 3 other locations. After work, I chose to walk home instead of taking the bus. I needed the fresh air, the space. By the time I got home, the sky had already turned a soft blue-gray. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop again. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Then, I remembered a name Daniel had mentioned, someone he'd worked with during a merger in Chicago, a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property disputes. I found her email, attached the entire folder, and added no note, no signature, just the subject: Intellectual property theft, internal evidence attached. I hit send. That night, I barely slept, but I didn't toss and turn either. I was done waiting for someone to acknowledge what was happening. This time, I was taking control. I was sending the signal, and someone would respond. By the time the office lights flickered on the next morning, I was already sitting at the far corner of the conference room, right by the humming printer. It wasn't even subtle. My name had been left off the agenda again. No welcome slide, no introduction, not even a seating card. Junior staffers, some with barely 6 months of experience, sat at the main table. Mallory had an entire section dedicated to her. She glanced at me for a second, then turned back to her tablet. She knew. They all did. I didn't ask questions. I didn't try to fix it. I just pulled out my phone, opened the voice recorder app, and set it face down next to my notepad. The presentation kicked off with a bloated slideshow, full of recycled metrics, half of which were pulled straight from my research. When one of the interns misinterpreted a dataset I had built from scratch, no one corrected her. When Olivia stepped in to wrap up, she nodded toward the team like a proud principal at an awards ceremony. "These are the future of Lumen Analytics," she said, her smile polished, her words rehearsed. The applause was deafening, loud enough to drown out the white noise ringing in my ears. The meeting dragged on. When it finally ended, I waited for the hallway to clear before packing up. As I reached for my bag, a new email popped up on my screen. It had been sent to a small group, with me accidentally included. Subject: Thursday debrief, internal only. The first line said, "Honestly, she's just good for coffee runs and filling the diversity line item." A second reply came moments later. "She still thinks she's in the running for VP. Adorable." I didn't react. Not outwardly. I hit forward. Then, 2. My secure email, subject: documentation. Body empty. I closed the tab, then walked calmly out of the room into the hallway, where Olivia stood by the coffee station, chatting with Bennett, the investor. Her voice was light, performative, just the way it always was when she had something to gain. She noticed me. "T, don't forget to restock the sugar packets. I think we're running low again." I stepped forward, just close enough for her to hear. "If you push again," I said, calm and steady, "I'll push back." Not like before, not silently. Her mouth curved into that practice smile she used for press photos. "Oh, come on, sis. Lighten up. It's just work." But there was a hesitation, a brief pause, before she spoke again. That hesitation was all I needed. Back at my desk, I opened the storage drawer and found the printed slides from last week's meeting, the ones Mallory had presented, filled with incorrect data. I attached a note to the top, no accusations, just corrections, and dropped it in Lucian's internal mail slot. About an hour later, he found me. He didn't speak a word, he simply walked past and slipped a folded paper into the side pocket of my tote bag. Inside, a printed copy of the email chain, exactly the same one I had already forwarded, but it wasn't from me. Someone else had flagged it, someone from within the circle. I stared at it for a long while, my fingers tracing the words like they might burn, but they didn't. Not anymore. The hallway outside buzzed with that familiar Friday energy. Casual conversations, lunch plans, weekend jokes. But something else lingered in the air now. A tension, a slowness, like the room was holding its breath. Maybe it was me, maybe it was them, because when the truth lingers in silence too long, even the liars start looking over their shoulders. The next time I saw Olivia was at the Friday investor luncheon, the kind of event where everything was perfectly staged. Name cards, catered salad bowls, scripted toasts, and even the water had lemon slices floating like props in a performance. I knew better than to expect anything less than theater. But what happened next, I didn't see coming. I stood by the long table near the windows, quietly pouring myself a second cup of coffee. The room buzzed with curated small talk when Olivia swept in, perfectly timed, perfectly dressed, 2 tall lattes in her hands. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on me with that familiar glint I'd learned not to trust. She walked toward me, smiling like it meant something, and then, at the last second, tripped. The coffee cup in her hand flew up, arced slightly, and landed squarely in my lap. The heat hit my lap before the pain even registered. "Oh no," she gasped, her voice high and sugary, eyes wide. "Kate, I'm so sorry. Still your favorite, right?" People laughed, not everyone, but enough. A few turned away, and 1 or 2 seemed like they wanted to speak up, but didn't. My skin burned. My thighs stung, the fabric clinging to my legs in wet patches. I didn't shout, didn't flinch. I looked her dead in the eye, smiled just enough to confuse her, then walked out slowly and upright, coffee soaking through every step. I went straight to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and just stood there, breathing. One hand on the cold metal wall, the other resting against the scarlet stain spreading on my thigh. This wasn't clumsy, it wasn't accidental. It was her final warning. But what she didn't know was that it was also mine. I changed into a pair of workout leggings I kept in my locker, cleaned myself up as best I could, and returned to my desk. A new email was waiting in my inbox. Subject: "Congratulations, Mallory." I opened it, and there it was in bold. "Please join us in welcoming Mallory Penn to her new role as Director of Data Operations." The position I had outlined, the department I'd spent months rebuilding, the workflow I'd designed from scratch, handed over like a party favor. And beneath the announcement, a quote from Olivia. "Young women like Mallory are the future of Lumen Analytics." I didn't feel betrayed anymore. I felt confirmed. It wasn't neglect. It was strategy, and I had played right into it until now. I opened the encrypted folder on my personal drive. I uploaded the footage from the security camera near the elevator. It was a full view of the spill, the angle perfect. Her trajectory, her smirk just before impact, crystal clear. Then I added the mentorship logs, the entire document trail showing every time I reviewed Mallory's data, corrected her models, prepped her presentations, dates, signatures, even her notes in my handwriting. The folder had already been named. Public Disclosure, Stage 1. I opened my leather-bound journal and wrote one simple sentence. They gave me coffee. I'll give them fire. By early evening, most of the office had emptied. Only a few lights remained on across the floor. I was updating documentation for the legal team when I heard a knock at my door. Not loud, just enough. Lucien stood in the hallway, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak. He just walked over and placed a brown envelope on my desk, then turned and left. Inside was an HR complaint form, already signed, anonymous, but the wording was unmistakable. It referenced a hostile incident in a professional setting. No names were mentioned, but the description pointed clearly to one thing: the coffee. At the bottom, in the HR officer's handwriting, it said, "Filed under review." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. There were eyes now, watching quietly, maybe even with regret. Not everyone would speak up, not everyone was brave, but not everyone was blind anymore either. If they wanted a show, they were about to get one they couldn't erase. That following Monday began like any other, but there was something different about the stillness in the room. Too rehearsed, too clean, too coordinated. By mid-morning, the announcement hit every inbox. Subject: Leadership in Sync. Meet the Lumen Women Body. Sisterhood in Innovation. I stared at the subject line, blinking once before opening it. There it was, a full-page press release, glossy and glowing. A photo of Olivia and me smiling side by side. Except I hadn't smiled like that in months. The picture was from last year's holiday mixer, cropped and filtered to remove the people around us, altered just enough to make us look like a united front. The caption read, "A legacy of trust, vision, and sisterhood." Olivia was quoted below it. "My sister and I have always believed in building this together. We thrive because we lead together." I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my mug across the room. Instead, I clicked print. As the page slid out of the tray, I whispered under my breath. The photo was real. The moment never happened. 2 hours later, I got a ping from a client I hadn't spoken to in a while. Marcus from Denver. He forwarded me a proposal that had been sent to him for a new cross-regional data analysis initiative. His message was short. "Hey, Kate, didn't you mention this structure to me last quarter?" I opened the attachment and there it was. My structure, my analysis flow, my predictive grid. Word for word. Only 2 names were listed: Mallory Penn and Olivia Keegan. No acknowledgement, not a footnote, not even based on a concept by nothing. But there it was, buried in the metadata, my watermark, dated, logged, unmistakable. I stared at the screen, then slowly closed my laptop. They weren't just trying to erase me. They were replacing me in real time. One asset, one headline, one client proposal at a time. That afternoon, the company held a quarterly town hall. All hands on deck, cameras rolling, clients and partners on Zoom. The topic: Shared Vision, Lumen's Next Chapter. Olivia took the stage, wearing her signature navy blazer and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She launched into a speech about leadership, vision, and family legacy. I sat in the back row, perfectly still. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my voice. I waited until the Q&A. When they opened the floor, I stood up, calm, steady. "Olivia," I said, "can you clarify when exactly you and I last co-authored a project together?" You could feel the air shift. The mic handler hesitated. Someone coughed. Olivia blinked only slightly, but it was enough. She forced a smile. "Kate, I'm not sure that's relevant to today's discussion." "No." I tilted my head. "Because it's relevant to the article you published this morning, and it's certainly relevant to the client proposal sent to Denver yesterday." Silence. A junior staffer raised her hand and asked carefully, "Didn't Kate design Project Cora?" Another voice chimed in, this time from the tech team. "Yeah, the predictive grid was hers. We beta tested it back in October." Then Lucian stood up, quiet but firm. "I can confirm the time-stamped files. The source material is Kate Lumen." No one laughed. No one looked away this time. I looked around the room. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to plead. She built a family of mirrors. I lit a match. And just like that, the silence that once protected her was now about to testify against her. After the town hall ended, everyone quickly left the auditorium, except they didn't come toward me. No one said a word, not even Lucian. His usual nod was replaced by lowered eyes as he passed my row. Back at my desk, I ate lunch alone again. The cold pasta I brought from home tasted like cardboard, but I kept chewing, one bite after another, like always. No one sat next to me. No one mentioned the Q&A. No one acknowledged what they'd heard, because doing so would require them to choose a side. And that could mean risk. It's funny how silence isn't neutral. It just waits to see who's going to win before it decides to speak. I was clearing my dishes when the elevator dinged. The sound wasn't unusual until I heard it again. A brief pause, then footsteps. 2 men in dark suits walked out first, scanning the room like they already knew where to go. Then came the third figure, Daniel. He didn't wear the usual softness he wore at home. No loosened tie, no casual button-down. He was in a fitted black suit, no tie. Eyes focused straight ahead. It wasn't just his clothes. It was the way the air shifted around him, like the room had finally decided to listen. Olivia appeared from her office, faltering just slightly. She put on her usual grin, the one she saved for investors and cameras. But her shoulders weren't sitting right. "Daniel," she said, as though she had just bumped into an old college friend. "We weren't expecting you." He cut her off quietly. "Let's make this brief." The boardroom doors opened like clockwork. I followed, not because I was told to, but because I knew exactly what was coming. Inside the room, Olivia sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 executive assistants. Lucian sat down without a word. I stayed standing. Daniel placed a single manila folder in front of her, then another in front of Lucian. "Transfer of controlling interest," he said simply. "Effective immediately. Lumen Analytics is now majority owned by Wexler Holdings. It's been a quiet acquisition by design." Olivia's face didn't fall, it froze. "This is a joke?" Olivia said. Daniel remained unmoving. "What's been happening in this company for the last year? That's the joke. I'm here to end it." She let out a sharp laugh. "You bought us out. That's your revenge for me defending this place." He didn't flinch. "You defended a lie. You curated a brand. You erased people." Then he turned to Lucian. "I'll be appointing interim compliance and ethics leadership, starting with a full audit of internal communications, reporting structures, and project authorship." Lucian gave a single firm nod. Daniel looked to me next. I reached into my bag, pulled out a USB drive, and walked calmly to the front of the room. I plugged it in. One click, the first slide appeared, a screenshot of the internal email where I was labeled Diversity Decor. Next, a proposal to a client, with Mallory's name pasted over my model. Then, footage from the security camera, showing Olivia's very intentional coffee spill. Finally, a single slide with bold text. "If silence protects the abuser, let noise redeem the truth." No music, no voiceover, just the truth laid bare. Mallory, seated in the corner, buried her face in her hands. Lucian looked directly at Olivia. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" She blinked, once, then twice. "This is a hit job." "It's a correction," I said calmly. Daniel stood tall. "Effective immediately. Olivia Keegan is removed from her role. We will begin a review of all project leads this week. Your contract is terminated, pending legal review." Olivia's voice cracked. "You're doing this now, here, in front of her?" Daniel didn't look my way when he said, "You did it to yourself. You just didn't expect anyone to say it out loud." She turned to our mother, seated at the far end of the room. Mom didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stared out the window as if she didn't recognize either of us. As the room emptied, one by one, I stayed behind. I wasn't done yet. I had one last thing to say. I waited until the last door clicked shut behind them. The boardroom was silent, save for the quiet hum of the projector cooling down. I walked over, removed the USB from the port, and tucked it into the inside pocket of my blazer, just like I had done countless times before. I didn't need to say anything more, but I did. I turned toward the window where she still stood, unmoved. She hadn't looked at me once since it all unfolded. Her reflection on the glass was sharper than her presence in the room. I stepped close enough for her to hear. You said once I was too soft to survive this world, I said, calm, not bitter. Turns out, just quiet enough to outlast it. She blinked slowly. You look more like your father these days. I nodded. He always said, truth doesn't need a microphone. There was no apology. I wasn't waiting for one. Later that week, I returned to the office early, just as the cleaning crew was finishing up. The lobby looked the same, but there was a shift in the energy, lighter, less tense. The whispers had changed. There were no glances behind backs anymore, just people working and breathing. Olivia's nameplate had been removed. Her office door was repainted. Mallory had handed in her resignation, citing a need to realign with her values. I didn't stop her. I walked past the front desk where a new framed poster hung beside the mission statement. It featured a quote, "Mine. Silence gave me strength, but truth gave me my voice." The receptionist smiled at me, not nervously, not out of obligation, just genuinely. I nodded and continued to my office, spending the morning reviewing proposals. Lucian and the new head of HR joined me by mid-afternoon to finalize the company's first formal code of ethical collaboration. We outlined policies on author credit, project oversight, and whistleblower protection. For the first time, we were naming what no one had dared to describe before: gaslighting, sabotage, performative allyship. Lucian signed the draft, handing me a pen. "This wouldn't exist without you," he said simply. "It shouldn't have needed me," I replied, "but it does now." The next morning, a new message pinged into my inbox. Subject: "I owe you an apology from Mallory Penn." I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. She admitted she knew what was happening, that she allowed it, that she told herself she was just trying to survive, but she wasn't proud of how she stayed silent. I didn't reply. I archived the email, but I didn't delete it. A few weeks later, she showed up without calling. She walked slowly through the hallway, greeting a few people she didn't recognize anymore. She didn't ask for a tour. She didn't mention Olivia. She just stood by the glass wall in my office, watching the city outside. "I came to see it," she said. "The place that changed everything." I poured her a cup of tea. No milk, no sugar, just the way she liked it. She looked around. "You run this now." "I lead it," I corrected. She nodded. "It's cleaner, sharper." We didn't talk about what had happened. There was nothing to revisit. She had made her choices. I had made mine. But as she left, she paused at the doorway. "You never needed fixing," she said. "Just space." That night, I closed my laptop for the last time that week. The new partnership paperwork was finalized. Lumen Analytics would begin sponsoring leadership scholarships for women of color, pursuing degrees in data science and engineering. The first cohort had already been selected. 4 students, bright, sharp, quiet, but not invisible. As I turned off the lights and headed out, there was no applause, no spotlight, just a soft stillness that settled around me like a coat I had sewn for myself, stitch by stitch. They called it revenge, but I never needed them to fall. I just needed room to rise. You know, I used to think being quiet meant being weak, that staying calm meant giving up. But I've learned that silence, when chosen, can be power. And sometimes, the strongest move you'll ever make is to stand your ground without raising your voice. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible at work, in your family, in your own story, I want you to know you're not alone. And more importantly, you are not powerless. I didn't get here by luck. I got here by paying attention, keeping records, and listening when no one else would. By choosing not to become like the ones who tried to erase me. And if there's anything I've learned, it's this. You don't have to destroy anyone to reclaim yourself. Just stop shrinking.